A motorcycle rolls slowly down an empty, snow-buried main street in the dead of night. The headlight cuts through the blizzard. The rider's beard is white with frost. He has not stopped in 2,400 miles. In a small West Virginia coal town, all the houses are dark, all the porch lights are out. Every window is closed against the storm, except one. A diner on the corner, warm yellow light spilling onto the snow. Inside, an elderly woman sits alone in a booth. 2 plates of food in front of her, one untouched, one waiting. She does not eat. She watches the door. She's been watching this door for 12 years. Outside, the motorcycle pulls to the curb. The rider kills the engine. He looks through the window at the woman who does not yet know he exists. Around his neck, hidden under a frozen leather collar, hangs a pair of marine dog tags, and the name stamped on them. The bell above the door swings on a broken hinge. Snow blows across the linoleum. Eleanor Hartley does not move. She is 66 years old. She has run this diner alone for 16 years. She has seen drunks come through that door. She has seen lost truckers. She has seen kids on their way to nowhere. She has never seen a man carry the air with him the way this one does. The big stranger stands there in his crusted leather, patient, not closing the distance, waiting for permission. She finally finds her voice, soft, worn smooth by use. "That seat is taken, sir." The big man nods, slow, respectful. "I figured it might be." He doesn't move, doesn't sit, doesn't argue, just stands there, patient as a mountain. Eleanor lets her eyes travel up from his boots, wet leather, a heavy Carhartt jacket under the vest, a scar through one eyebrow, hair gone silver at the temples, and then her gaze stops, at his throat, hanging from a leather cord, half hidden under his collar, dull gray metal, stamped letters. The kind of thing a mother memorizes before she ever sees them. Marine dog tags. Her hand trembles. The coffee cup rattles in its saucer, because the name stamped on them is her dead son's. The man named Frank Caldwell watches her go pale. He saw her notice. He didn't try to hide it. He came 2,400 miles, across 7 states, through 3 storms, to this exact chair, on this exact Sunday. He's not leaving until the work is done. But he's a patient man. He waits. The snow keeps falling outside. The clock above the counter keeps ticking. Somewhere in the kitchen, a refrigerator hums. Eleanor's lips part. Close. Part again. "Where?" she whispers. "Where did you get those?" Frank reaches up, slowly, the way a man reaches for a wounded animal. He lifts the chain over his head, sets the dog tags on the table, right next to the untouched plate. Wyatt R. Hartley, USMC, O positive, Methodist. 12 years of dust, 12 years of carrying, 12 years of a promise he should have kept long ago. "Ma'am," Frank says. His voice is gravel and smoke and something deeper. "I should have brought these to you in 2012. He pauses. "I am very, very late." Eleanor stares at the tags. She doesn't reach for them. Not yet. Tears slide down her cheeks. Silent. The kind of tears that have been waiting a long time for permission. "Sit down," she says. Frank pulls out the chair across from her. The chair that has sat empty for 144 months. The chair where every Sunday after church, Eleanor Hartley has placed a plate of meatloaf and mashed potatoes and green beans. Hot food for a son who never came home. The big man sits down. His knees barely fit under the table. He folds his hands, bows his head, and whispers something Eleanor cannot hear. It sounds like a prayer. It sounds like an apology. It sounds like both. To understand what happened that Sunday night, you have to understand Milbrook, population 3,200, maybe less, depending on the year. A coal town tucked into the folds of the West Virginia mountains. The kind of place where the same families have lived on the same hills for 6 generations. Where the high school football team is the closest thing to religion outside of Sunday morning. Where every man over 60 has worked underground at some point in his life. And every woman over 60 has packed a lunch pail for a man going down. The mine closed in 1998. Most folks left. The ones who stayed because they could not imagine being anywhere else. Eleanor Hartley was one of those folks. She was born in Milbrook in 1958, raised in a clapboard house on Hickory Lane. Her father pulled coal out of the mountain for 41 years. Her mother taught 3rd grade. Eleanor was the youngest of 4. Her brothers all moved away. To Charleston, to Pittsburgh, to a place in Ohio she hadn't visited in 20 years. She left once, in 1980, at the age of 22. She'd gone to Pittsburgh chasing a dream she couldn't quite name. Took a job waiting tables at a roadhouse near the river. Met a man there. A man with kind eyes and a Triumph motorcycle and a way of laughing that made the whole room turn. His name was Tommy. But that's a story for later. Eleanor came home in 1981. Pregnant. Quiet. Carrying a secret she would carry to her grave, or so she thought. She married Robert Hartley that fall. Robert was a good man, a coal miner like her father. Patient, decent. He never asked questions she didn't want to answer. He raised her son Wyatt as his own. He loved that boy with the steady, unspectacular love of a man who knew what love cost. Robert died of black lung in 2008. Eleanor opened Hartley's kitchen 6 months later. She needed something to do with her hands. The diner sat on Main Street. 12 stools at the counter, 6 booths along the wall. A jukebox in the corner that still played for a quarter. Pies in a glass case. Coffee that never stopped flowing. Folks came for the meatloaf. They stayed for Eleanor. She knew everyone's name, everyone's children's names, everyone's troubles. She listened more than she talked. That was her gift. And every Sunday, after the 11 o'clock service at First Methodist, she walked the 4 blocks from the church to her diner, unlocked the door, turned on the lights, cooked 2 plates of meatloaf, one for her, one for Wyatt. Wyatt Hartley enlisted in the Marine Corps in the summer of 2001. 2 months before the towers fell. He served 2 tours in Iraq, came home with a Bronze Star and a quiet that hadn't been there before. Re-enlisted. Trained as a mountain warfare instructor at the Marine Corps Mountain Warfare Training Center in Bridgeport, California. In November of 2012, he was running an advanced cold weather training exercise on Vail Pass, Colorado. The official report said an avalanche hit the training group. The official report said Wyatt Hartley was lost in the slide. The official report said his body was never recovered. Captain on the line. 2 Marines killed, 1 missing, presumed dead. Eleanor refused to hold a funeral. She refused the death benefit. She refused to say the words. She bought a small white headstone anyway, set it next to Robert's in the church cemetery on the hill. It read, Wyatt Robert Hartley, Semper Fidelis, waiting. And every Sunday for 12 years, she set a place at the table. Folks in town worried about her at first. Then they accepted it. Then they admired it. That was the kind of woman Eleanor Hartley was. She kept her promises, even to the dead, especially to the dead. Frank Caldwell wasn't supposed to be in West Virginia. He was supposed to be in Texas. Frank had spent the last 14 years of his life between 2 zip codes. A small ranch outside Amarillo, where he kept his late wife's herb garden alive. And the open road. He was 68 years old, 6'4", 240 pounds of weathered muscle and old scars. His hair had gone silver in his 50s. His beard had gone silver in his 60s. His eyes were the same color they'd always been. The color of gun smoke. The color of November sky. He rode a 1998 Harley-Davidson Road King. The same bike he'd ridden for 26 years. The bike was the only thing he'd never let anyone fix but himself. His wife Margaret used to say he loved that bike like it was a child. Margaret had been gone for 14 years now. Cancer. The fast kind. Diagnosed in March of 2010. Buried by Halloween. Frank had been an army chaplain back then, rank of major, 23 years of service. He'd preached at chapels in Germany and South Korea. He'd buried young men in Kuwait during Operation Desert Storm in 1991. He'd held the hands of dying soldiers and dying soldiers' mothers and dying soldiers' wives. He'd believed. For most of his life he'd believed. When Margaret got sick, he prayed. When she got worse, he prayed harder. When she died in his arms on a Tuesday afternoon with the cottonwoods shaking outside the window and the sun coming in through the cheap motel curtains of the hospice room, Frank Caldwell stopped praying. He hung up the chaplain's collar. He bought the Harley. He started riding. For 14 years, he rode. Not because he was looking for something, because he was running from something. That's what he told himself. But he was a chaplain too long not to know the difference between running and searching. And the truth was somewhere in the back of his heart, in the part he couldn't quite reach anymore. Frank Caldwell knew exactly what he was doing. He was waiting. Waiting for one final piece of unfinished business to come due. It came due in May of this year, a letter, forwarded 3 times, from the offices of a Marine Corps casualty assistance officer in Quantico, to a P.O. box in San Antonio, to a P.O. box in Albuquerque, to his ranch outside Amarillo. The letter was about a duffel bag belonging to a Marine named Wyatt Hartley. A duffel bag that had been sitting in a storage unit at the Mountain Warfare Training Center in Bridgeport for 12 years. Misfiled, forgotten, recently rediscovered during a base inventory. Inside the duffel bag, among the standard kit of a deployed Marine, the casualty officer had found a worn King James Bible. Written inside the cover in a young man's careful handwriting were the words, "If anything happens to me, please send this to Major Frank Caldwell, U.S. Army retired, and the letter inside please send to Eleanor Hartley, Millbrook, West Virginia. He'll know what to do." Frank had not seen the Bible in 21 years. He had given it to Wyatt Hartley in 2003, a boy of 22, fresh out of basic, sitting in Frank's office at Camp Lejeune the night before his first deployment to Iraq, crying without making a sound, telling Frank he was scared, telling Frank he'd never been religious, telling Frank he didn't know how to pray. Frank had given him his own Bible, the one Margaret had given Frank on the day he was commissioned. He'd told the boy, "Son, you don't have to know how, you just have to start." And then Frank had not heard from Wyatt Hartley again. The Bible came back to Frank in a cardboard box in May of 2024. The letter, sealed in an envelope yellow with age, was inside. Frank had carried both for 6 months. He had not opened the letter. It was not his to open. He had spent 6 months trying to talk himself out of riding to West Virginia. He had failed. And so, on the second Sunday of November, in the middle of a blizzard, he had not planned for on a stretch of 2-lane highway he had not driven in 40 years. Frank Caldwell pulled into Milbrook on a Harley with frozen handlebars. His face raw, his hands numb. The Bible and the letter wrapped in oilcloth and zipped inside his jacket against his chest. He saw the lights of Hartley's kitchen. He saw a woman through the window sitting alone with 2 plates. He knew. He knew before he ever stepped off the bike. And he walked through that door. And he asked the question. Eleanor Hartley made Frank a fresh plate. She did not offer him the plate that had been waiting for Wyatt. That plate stayed where it was. Steam long gone, gravy congealing, a monument made of meatloaf and memory. Frank understood. He did not ask. He ate slowly, the way a man eats who has not eaten a real meal in 3 days, with gratitude, with reverence. He cut his meatloaf into squares. He chewed each bite. He laid his fork down between bites. Eleanor watched him. She noticed the calluses on his hands, the kind of calluses that came from gripping handlebars for 10,000 hours. She noticed the way he bowed his head before he picked up his fork. Not theatrical, not performed, just a habit so old it had become a part of him. She noticed the way he favored his left shoulder. She noticed the small silver cross pinned to the inside of his leather vest. Most of all, she noticed that he was not in a hurry. Most men were in a hurry. This one was not. After a long while, she spoke. "You're a long way from home, mister." Frank set his fork down. "Yes, ma'am." "Where you headed?" Frank looked up at her. The diner lights flickered. The blizzard pressed against the windows. The jukebox, untouched in years, sat silent in the corner. "Right here, ma'am." Eleanor's hand drifted to the dog tags on the table. She still had not picked them up. She was afraid to pick them up. She was afraid that if she touched them, 12 years of holding herself together would come apart all at once. "Tell me your name," she said. "Frank Caldwell." "And how did you know my Wyatt?" Frank took a long breath, the kind of breath a man takes before he steps off a high place. "I was his chaplain, ma'am. Camp Lejeune. The night before his first deployment, October of 2003. Eleanor closed her eyes. She remembered that week. Wyatt had called her from a payphone. She remembered his voice, steady, lying, pretending he was not afraid. She remembered telling him she loved him. She remembered hanging up the phone and sitting on the kitchen floor and crying for an hour. "I gave him a Bible that night," Frank said. "It was my wife's. She had given it to me. And he kept it. He kept it, ma'am, for 9 years. All through Iraq, both tours, all through his training command, all through Bridgeport." Frank reached into his jacket. He pulled out a leather-wrapped bundle. He set it on the table next to the dog tags. He unwrapped it slowly. A Bible, worn at the corners. The gold leaf rubbed off the edges. The spine cracked in a way that meant it had been read 1,000 times. On the inside cover, in Wyatt Hartley's careful, boyish handwriting, "This Bible belongs to Corporal Wyatt R. Hartley, U. SMC. If found, please return to the chaplain who gave it to me or to my mother, Eleanor Hartley of Millbrook, West Virginia. She is the best woman I know." Eleanor pressed her hand to her mouth. She did not make a sound. She just shook. For a long, long time, she just shook. Frank waited. The diner was warm. The blizzard kept howling. The clock kept ticking. After a while, Eleanor reached out, slowly, like a woman reaching across 12 years. She picked up the Bible. She held it against her chest. And then she finally cried. Not the silent tears from before. The other kind. The kind that come up from the basement of a person, the locked basement, the one no one is supposed to see. Frank Caldwell did not look away. He had sat with grieving people for half his life. He knew the only proper thing to do was bear witness. So he bore witness. He bowed his head. He waited. And when Eleanor was finally able to speak, her voice came out raw. "There's a letter," she said. It was not a question. Frank nodded. "There is, ma'am." "He wrote it." "He did. For me." Frank hesitated. This was the moment he had dreaded for 6 months. This was the reason he had ridden 2,400 miles. This was the truth he was not sure how to tell. "Ma'am," Frank said carefully, "the letter was inside the Bible, with instructions. I have not read it." "Then read it now," Eleanor whispered. "Read it to me." Frank shook his head gently. "Ma'am, I don't believe I'm meant to be the one to read it." "Why not?" Frank's silver-gray eyes met hers. "Because the envelope," he said, "is not addressed to you." Eleanor froze. The diner went very, very quiet. "What?" Frank reached into the leather bundle. He took out an envelope. Yellowed. Sealed. He laid it on the table between them. Eleanor looked down. In Wyatt's handwriting, in faded blue ink. The envelope did not say Mom. It said, "To my father, whoever and wherever he is." Eleanor Hartley let out a sound. It was not a word. It was the sound a person makes when something they have buried, something they have prayed they took with them to the grave, something they have not allowed themselves to think of in 43 years, comes walking back through their front door wearing a Marine Corps uniform and asking to be acknowledged. Frank Caldwell did not understand yet. He thought he was just delivering a letter. He had no idea that the man named in that envelope had been his own brother. He had no idea that he had been riding all his life toward a family he never knew he had. He just sat there, across from a woman shaking like a leaf, in a diner, in a coal town, in the middle of a blizzard, with 12 years of silence finally cracking open between them. The bell over the door rang. Eleanor jumped. Frank turned. 2 men stood in the doorway, stomping snow off their boots. The first was Sheriff Earl Whitfield, 66 years old, 38 years on the Milbrook police force, a face like a granite slab, hands like ham hocks. He had known Wyatt Hartley since the boy was old enough to hold a fishing pole. He had been one of Robert Hartley's pallbearers. He did not like strangers. He especially did not like strangers in leather in his town sitting at Eleanor Hartley's table. The second man was Reverend Theodore Brooks, 62, pastor of First Methodist for the last 19 years. A thin, careful man with kind eyes and a chronic worry line between his brows. He had been calling Eleanor every Sunday night for 12 years to make sure she got home from the diner safely. He had not been able to reach her tonight. The phone lines were down. He had walked over, in a blizzard, because that is what he did. Sheriff Whitfield's eyes went straight to the dog tags on the table, then to Frank, then back to the dog tags, then back to Frank. The sheriff's hand drifted very casually to rest on the butt of the service revolver on his hip. "Eleanor," he said, his voice low, steady. "You all right, hon?" Eleanor did not answer. She was still looking at the envelope on the table, the letter to a man whose name she had not spoken in 43 years. Reverend Brooks stepped forward. Quietly, he took in the scene, the Bible, the dog tags, the stranger, Eleanor's tears, the envelope. He had been a pastor a long time. He understood immediately that something sacred was happening at this table, something sacred and something dangerous. He laid a hand very gently on the sheriff's arm. "Earl," he murmured. "Wait a moment." Sheriff Whitfield did not take his eyes off Frank. "Mister," he said, "I don't know who you are. I don't know what you're doing in my town. But that woman has been through more than her share. So I'm going to ask you one time real polite. What is your business here?" Frank Caldwell rose slowly from his chair. He kept his hands visible. He kept his voice low. "Sheriff, my name is Frank Caldwell, Major U.S. Army retired. 23 years of service. Chaplain Corps. I came here to deliver a Bible to a Gold Star mother. The Bible belonged to her son, Corporal Wyatt Hartley, who was a friend of mine." Frank paused. "I have done what I came to do, sir. I do not intend to cause any trouble in your town. With your permission, I will check into a room at the motel up the road, and tomorrow morning when this storm breaks, I will be on my way." The sheriff studied him for a long moment. Then his eyes moved to the dog tags on the table, then to Eleanor, then back to Frank. Slowly, his hand came off the revolver, but not all the way. "Eleanor," the sheriff said, "is that true?" Eleanor finally looked up. Her eyes were red, her face was wet, but her voice when it came was steel under velvet. "Earl Whitfield," she said, "this man is my guest. Sit down, both of you. I'll bring coffee." The sheriff opened his mouth to object, closed it, took off his hat, sat down. Reverend Brooks sat down across from him. Frank Caldwell remained standing for a moment longer. He looked down at Eleanor. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "if you'd rather I went on, I will." Eleanor reached up. She put her thin, work-worn hand over his big, scarred one. "Mr. Caldwell," she said, "there is a storm outside and there is a storm inside this letter. You are not going anywhere tonight." Frank sat back down. The 4 of them sat in the warm, glowing diner. The blizzard hammered the windows. The clock ticked. The unopened letter lay between them, addressed to a ghost. And outside on the snow-buried streets of Milbrook, West Virginia, a wind began to rise. A wind that had been blowing toward this table for 43 years. A wind that was not by any measure finished yet. It was nearly midnight when Frank Caldwell finally walked back out into the storm. Eleanor had not opened the letter. She had not been able to. She had asked Frank in a voice barely above a whisper if he would come back in the morning, after the 11 o'clock service, after she had had a night to pray. Frank had said yes. Of course he had said yes. He had ridden 2,400 miles. He could ride one more morning. He pushed the Harley the 4 blocks to the Mountain View Motel because the snow was too deep to ride. The motel was a single-story L-shape with 12 rooms, a flickering neon sign, and a night clerk named Doreen who was knitting a scarf when he walked in. Doreen took one look at him and said, "Lord have mercy, mister. You look half froze." Frank paid cash for room 6. He carried his saddlebag and his oilcloth bundle inside. He turned on the heater, sat on the edge of the lumpy bed, pulled off his boots. For a long time he did not move. Then he reached into his jacket. He took out a small battered photograph he had carried in his wallet for 39 years. It was a picture of his older brother, Thomas Caldwell, Tommy, born in 1948, 10 years older than Frank. Korean War orphan raised by an aunt in Pennsylvania who had also raised Frank. The closest thing to a father Frank had ever known. Tommy in the picture was 32 years old. He had a Triumph motorcycle and a leather jacket and a grin that could light up a county fair. The picture had been taken in the summer of 1980 outside a roadhouse near Pittsburgh. There was a young woman in the picture too, a waitress, Tommy had said. 22, quiet, pretty, from some little town down in West Virginia. Tommy had been crazy about her. Tommy had told Frank in their last letter that he was thinking about asking her to marry him. Tommy had died 3 months later. A trucker ran a red light at an intersection in Ohio. Tommy went under the wheels. He was 32. Frank had been 24. He had not understood at the time why the loss had hollowed him out so completely. He understood it now. Tommy had not just been his brother. Tommy had been his only family. And after Tommy died, Frank had drifted into the chaplaincy almost by accident, looking for a way to sit with grief instead of running from it. Frank looked at the photograph, at the woman. He had only ever seen her in this picture. He had never known her name. Tommy had written to him about her. In letters Frank still kept in a metal box in his closet in Amarillo. Letters where Tommy called her only ever my Ellie. Frank Caldwell sat on the edge of a motel bed in Milbrook, West Virginia. He looked down at the photograph. He looked toward the window, toward the diner, toward the woman who had picked up the Bible and pressed it to her chest. And the gunsmoke eyes of Frank Caldwell narrowed. A thought formed. A thought he refused to finish. Outside, the wind kept rising. And inside Frank Caldwell, for the first time in 14 years, something that felt almost like prayer began very slowly to form. Frank Caldwell did not sleep that night. He sat in the motel chair until first light, the photograph in his hand, the wind howling outside, his mind running in circles he could not break. A waitress in Pittsburgh, summer of 1980, a young woman from a little town in West Virginia. Tommy had called her Ellie. Eleanor was a name that became Ellie. Frank knew this. He knew this the way you know the color of your own front door, the way you know the sound of your mother's voice. But knowing a thing and saying a thing are not the same. So he did not say it. Not to himself. Not yet. Because if it was true, it changed everything. If it was true the woman across the table last night was not a stranger. If it was true the boy in the dog tags was not a stranger either. Frank Caldwell had ridden 2,400 miles to deliver a Bible to a Gold Star mother. He may have ridden 2,400 miles into the only family he had left in the world. He set the photograph face down on the nightstand. He could not look at it any longer. By dawn, the storm had broken. The sky over Milbrook was the color of wet steel. The snow on Main Street came up past Frank's knees. The plows had not yet made it down from the county road. Frank pulled on his boots, pulled on his coat, picked up the leather-wrapped envelope. He walked the 4 blocks to the diner. He walked slowly, like a man walking towards something he was not ready to know. The diner was already open. Eleanor Hartley had not slept either. She had walked over at 5 in the morning. She had unlocked the door. She had started the coffee. She had taken down a fresh tablecloth and laid it over the corner booth. She had set out 2 clean cups. She had placed the dog tags and the Bible at the head of the table, side by side, the way you set out the silverware before a holiday meal. She had not opened the letter. She had set it next to the Bible sealed. She had decided sometime in the long hours before sunrise that the letter belonged to Frank Caldwell as much as it belonged to her. He was the man Wyatt had trusted to carry it. He was the man who had ridden through 3 storms to bring it home. If the letter was for Wyatt's father, then there were things in it Frank needed to hear before she did. That was the kind of woman Eleanor was. She kept her promises, even to the dead. When Frank stepped through the door, the bell rang softly. Not like the night before. The diner was warm. The grill was hissing. Eleanor was in her apron pouring coffee into a cup at the booth. She looked up. She smiled at him. It was a small smile, a tired smile, but it was real. "Good morning, Mr. Caldwell." "Good morning, ma'am." "Sit down. I made biscuits." Frank sat down. He could not remember the last time anyone had made him biscuits. They had been eating in silence for 10 minutes when the bell over the door rang again. An old man stepped inside. 78 years old, tall but stooped, white crew cut, a wool coat over coveralls, a cane in one hand, a face like a topographical map of every storm he had ever weathered. Eleanor looked up. "Pops," she said quietly. "You're early." "Couldn't sleep," the old man said. "Heard there was a stranger in town." He walked over to the booth. He looked Frank up and down. His eyes were the pale blue of a winter sky. They had seen a lot. They missed almost nothing. "You the fellow with the dog tags?" he said. "Yes, sir." "Slide over." Frank slid over. The old man eased himself into the booth. He laid the cane against the wall. He nodded at Eleanor. "Cup of coffee, Ellie." Eleanor poured. She did not say a word. The old man wrapped his big knuckled hands around the cup. He took a long swallow. He let it warm him. Then he turned to Frank. "Walter Mercer," he said. "Folks here call me Pops." "Frank Caldwell." "I know who you are. Eleanor told the Reverend last night. The Reverend told me at 6 this morning. Word travels?" "Yes, sir." Walter studied him. "You served?" "Yes, sir. Army. 23 years. Chaplain Corps. Retired in 2010. "Where?" "Germany, Korea, Kuwait. Desert Storm." "Yes, sir." Walter nodded slowly. "I was Korea, 51 to 53, 2nd Infantry Division. I buried a lot of boys at Heartbreak Ridge." "I'm sorry." "Don't be. They earned their rest." The 2 old soldiers sat in silence for a moment. Eleanor drifted away to the counter. She knew this conversation needed room. Walter Mercer leaned forward. His voice dropped. "Son," he said, "I've known Eleanor Hartley for 50-some years. I knew her husband Robert. I knew her boy Wyatt from the time he was knee-high to a fence post." Frank waited. "Wyatt Hartley was the best boy this town ever produced," Walter said. "Polite, steady, worked summers in the hardware store, took his mama to church every Sunday after his daddy passed, joined the Marines because he believed in something bigger than himself." Walter's pale eyes hardened. When he went missing, half this town went with him, Eleanor especially. She has been holding on by a thread for 12 years. "So I'm going to say this once, mister, and I'm going to say it kind." He pointed a thick finger at Frank. "If you're a grifter, if you're some old biker who heard a sad story and figured he could swing through town and get a hot meal and a teary widow's gratitude, you will not make it to the county line. Do you understand me?" Frank did not flinch. He met Walter's eyes. "Mr. Mercer, I am not a grifter. What are you then? Frank set down his fork. I am a man who failed to do in 2012 what should have been done in 2012. I am here to set that right, as best I can. 12 years late. Walter studied him for a long time. Then he leaned back. He nodded just once. All right, son. He took another swallow of coffee. Then I reckon you and me are going to be friends. After Walter left, Eleanor sat back down across from Frank. The diner was empty. The closed sign still hung on the door. The snow outside was beginning to melt under a thin winter sun. She pushed the Bible toward him. Mr. Caldwell, she said, I want you to read me something from this, the way you would have read to him. Frank looked at the Bible he had given a frightened 22-year-old boy in 2003. He had not opened a Bible in 14 years. His hands trembled when he picked it up. Margaret had given him this Bible the day he was commissioned, October of 1987. She had written inside the cover in her careful schoolteacher script for my Frank, Wherever you go, the Lord goes also. M. When he had given it to Wyatt, he had not had the heart to tear out the inscription. He had simply written underneath it, and now Wyatt, the Lord goes with you too. Chaplain Caldwell. Frank stared at the two inscriptions. His own handwriting 21 years younger. His wife's handwriting. Margaret. Gone 14 years. Eleanor watched him. Mr. Caldwell, she said gently, you don't have to. No, ma'am, I do. He turned the pages. He found the passage almost without looking. The pages fell open to it on their own, the way pages fall open in a book that has been read in one place 1,000 times. Psalm 23. The page was soft with use. The corner was creased. There was a faint stain on it. Coffee, maybe, or a tear. Frank cleared his throat. He read, The Lord is my shepherd. I shall not want. His voice broke a little. He kept going. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. Eleanor closed her eyes. She had heard her boy recite this in Sunday school when he was 9. She had heard him recite it at his father's funeral when he was 26. She had recited it herself alone every Sunday for 12 years. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death. Frank read, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. He stopped. He could not finish. The big man bowed his head. Eleanor reached across the table. She took his hand. She finished it for him. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. The diner was so quiet, you could hear the clock. After a while, Eleanor said, My son loved that psalm. I know, Frank whispered. I taught it to him. He taught it to me again, after his first tour. Yes, ma'am. Eleanor squeezed his hand. Mr. Caldwell, whatever is in that letter, I think we ought to read it now. Eleanor opened the envelope herself. She used a butter knife from the table, the way she would have opened any letter on any morning in any year of her life. The paper inside was thin, 4 pages, front and back. Wyatt's careful handwriting. She unfolded it with hands that did not shake. She had decided sometime in the night that she would not let her hands shake. Whatever this letter said, whatever it cost her, she would receive it standing up. She began to read aloud. Dear sir, if you are reading this letter, then I have not made it home. I am sorry for that. Not for me, for my mother mostly. She has lost more than her share already. And for you, sir, even though we have never met. I am not sure how to begin a letter like this, so I will just begin. My name is Wyatt Robert Hartley. I am a corporal in the United States Marine Corps. I was born in Milbrook, West Virginia on October 14th, 1981. My mother is Eleanor Hartley. My father on paper was Robert Hartley, a coal miner. He was a good man, and he raised me as his own, and I loved him very much. He passed in 2008. But Robert Hartley was not my biological father. I learned this when I was 18 years old. My mother told me one night when she had had too much wine. She had not meant to tell me, but she did. And in the morning she begged me to forgive her. There was nothing to forgive. Eleanor's voice caught. She kept going. She told me that in 1980, when she was 22 years old, she went to Pittsburgh for a season. She worked as a waitress at a roadhouse called the Blue Heron. She fell in love with a man there. A good man, she said. A man with a kind heart and a Triumph motorcycle. His name was Thomas Caldwell. She always called him Tommy. Frank Caldwell did not move. He did not breathe. He did not blink. His hand on the table went the color of bleached bone. Eleanor was watching the page. She had not yet looked up. She did not yet see his face. She read on. She told me that Tommy did not know about me. By the time she knew she was pregnant, she had already left Pittsburgh and come home. She was scared, and she was 22, and she did not know what to do. She married Robert that fall. She told no one. She told me that she heard 6 months after I was born that Tommy had been killed in a motorcycle accident in Ohio. She said she cried for 3 days, and then she put it away. She said she never spoke his name again until the night she told me. Sir, my mother has carried this for 40 years. She has never forgiven herself. I want you to know that. She did the best she could with the cards she was dealt. She is the best woman I know. Eleanor's voice was breaking now, but she did not stop. She had decided she would not stop. I am writing this letter the night before I deploy to Vail Pass for an advanced training exercise. It is November of 2012. I have been thinking about you, sir, for a long time. I have not had the courage to look for you while my mother is alive. I do not want to hurt her. She has been hurt enough. But if I do not come home, I want you to know that you had a son. And that son was raised right by a good woman and a good stepfather in a small town in West Virginia. That son went to church on Sundays and worked hard and joined the Marines because he believed in his country. That son loved his mother more than anything in this world. If you are alive, sir, please know that I would have liked to meet you. I have wondered about you my whole life. If you are not alive, then I hope this letter finds whoever loved you. I hope it tells them that the man named Thomas Caldwell mattered, that his life produced a life, that the love he had for my mother, even though it was brief, was not for nothing. I am giving this letter to a chaplain I trust. His name is Major Frank Caldwell. He gave me a Bible 11 years ago and told me to start praying, even though I did not know how. That Bible has gone everywhere with me. He is the reason I still believe in anything at all. I have asked him to find you, sir, if I cannot. Whoever you are, wherever you are. Please tell my mother that I love her. Please tell her that I knew. Please tell her that there was nothing to forgive. With respect, Corporal Wyatt R. Hartley, USM. Eleanor finished reading. She set the letter down. For a long time no one spoke. The diner clock ticked. The grill hissed. Outside, a snowplow finally rumbled down Main Street. Eleanor looked up at Frank. She saw his face. She saw his face and she stopped breathing. Frank Caldwell was crying, silently, without moving, the way a stone face cries when the rain runs down it. "Mr. Caldwell," Eleanor whispered. "What is it?" Frank could not answer. He reached into his jacket. He took out a battered photograph. He laid it on the table next to the letter. A young man with a Triumph motorcycle. A leather jacket. A grin that could light up a county fair. Standing outside a roadhouse near Pittsburgh in the summer of 1980. And next to him, his arm around her shoulders, a young waitress, 22 years old, quiet, pretty. Eleanor. Eleanor Hartley made a sound she had never made in her life. She reached for the photograph. Her fingers touched Tommy's face. "Oh," she whispered. "Oh, Lord, Oh, sweet Lord in heaven. She looked up at Frank. She saw his eyes for the first time. Really saw them. Not the gunsmoke gray, the shape of them. The set of the brow above them. She saw Tommy's eyes, in an old man's face. You, she breathed. You are? His brother, ma'am. Frank's voice was wrecked. Tommy was my brother. He was 10 years older than me. He raised me. After our folks died, he was all I had. And he wrote to me about a girl in Pittsburgh that summer. He called her Ellie, he said. He said he was going to marry her. Eleanor's hand went to her mouth. He died 3 months later, ma'am. November of 1980. A trucker ran a red light in Toledo. I was 24. I never knew. Tommy never knew. Frank's huge shoulders began to shake. The big man put his face in his hands. He had a son, Ellie. My brother had a son, and his son grew up to be a Marine, and his son died on a mountain, and I was the chaplain. I was the chaplain who gave him the Bible. I was the chaplain, and I never knew. Eleanor stood up. She walked around the booth. She sat down beside Frank Caldwell. The biker. The stranger. The man who, by some impossible mercy, was the only blood family her dead son had ever had on this earth. She put her arms around him. He folded into her. A 68-year-old man with hands like a blacksmith and a chest like a barrel weeping into the apron of a 66-year-old waitress in a small diner in a coal town in West Virginia. 43 years of silence broke open, and the morning sun came through the windows of Hartley's kitchen and lit them up like a stained glass window in a church neither of them had been able to enter for a long, long time. They sat together for nearly an hour. They did not speak much. Eleanor made fresh coffee. Frank wiped his face with a paper napkin. They looked at the photograph together. Eleanor told Frank about Tommy, the way he laughed, the way he sang along to the radio in his pickup truck, the way he had once driven all the way to Wheeling in a snowstorm to bring her chicken soup when she had the flu. Frank told Eleanor about Tommy, the way Tommy had taught him to ride a bike at 6 years old, the way Tommy had worked 2 jobs to put Frank through community college, the way Tommy had cried at Frank's high school graduation because their mother had not lived to see it. 2 old people, sharing a young man who had been gone 44 years, sharing him for the first time. Around 11, Frank stood up. He stretched. He walked over to the window. He looked out at Main Street. The plow had cleared the snow. A few cars were moving. A woman in a red coat was walking a dog. Frank's mind was already turning. He was a chaplain by training, but he had been a soldier first. And the soldier in him had a question that the chaplain in him was afraid to ask. He turned back to Eleanor. Ma'am, he said, did the Marines ever send you Wyatt's full file? Eleanor blinked. His file? His complete service record. The official report on the avalanche. The names of the men he was with. The autopsy, if there was one. The investigation. Eleanor shook her head slowly. They sent me a letter in 2013. They told me what happened. They told me his body was not recovered. They told me he was a fine Marine. Did they tell you any details? Not many. They said the avalanche was sudden. They said 3 men were lost, 2 recovered. Wyatt was the one they did not find. And you accepted that. What else was I going to do, Mr. Caldwell? Frank nodded. He understood. A grieving mother does not interrogate the United States Marine Corps, but a retired major chaplain who had spent 23 years in the chaplain corps, who had buried Marines and soldiers and airmen on 3 continents, who knew exactly which doors to knock on at Quantico and Camp Lejeune and Bridgeport. That was a different story. Frank reached into his pocket. He took out an old flip phone. It still worked. He scrolled through his contacts. Names from a life he had walked away from. Some of them dead now. Some retired. Some still in. He found the name he was looking for. Master Gunnery Sergeant Henry Pruitt, United States Marine Corps, 41 years of service. The senior enlisted man at the Mountain Warfare Training Center in Bridgeport. Frank had given Henry Pruitt's nephew last rites in a field hospital in Kuwait in 1991. Henry Pruitt had told Frank that day that if there was ever anything Frank needed, anything, for the rest of Frank's life. Frank had never called in the favor. He was about to. "Eleanor," Frank said, "I'd like to make a phone call, with your permission." Eleanor looked up at him. She did not ask what for. She had a feeling she already knew. "Make it," she said. It took Henry Pruitt 3 days to call back. In those 3 days, the snow began to melt. The county roads opened. Frank moved out of the motel and into the spare room above Eleanor's diner. The room had been Wyatt's when he came home on leave. It still had a Marine Corps poster on the wall and a high school football trophy on the dresser. Frank slept in the bed his nephew had slept in. His nephew. The word still felt strange in his mouth. Walter Mercer came by every morning for coffee. Reverend Brooks came by on Tuesday afternoon. Sheriff Whitfield, who had grown a great deal less suspicious of Frank since hearing the truth, dropped off a fruit basket and shook Frank's hand and said, "Welcome to Milbrook, Mr. Caldwell." The town began to absorb him, the way small towns do, quietly, steadily, without fuss. On the third night, the phone in the diner rang. Eleanor picked it up. She listened for a moment. Her face went still. She handed the phone to Frank. "It's for you," she said. "A master gunny from California." Frank took the phone. He stepped into the back room. The conversation lasted 47 minutes. When Frank came out, his face was a different face than the one that had gone in. His eyes had changed. The gun smoke gray had gone darker, almost black. Eleanor was sitting in the booth, the dog tags in front of her, her hands folded. She looked up. "Frank," she said. It was the first time she had used his Christian name. "Tell me." Frank sat down. He took a long breath. He took her hands in his. "Eleanor," he said, "Wyatt did not die in a training accident." Eleanor's eyes did not waver. "Tell me." "There was an avalanche. That part is true. 3 Marines were caught in it. 2 younger Marines, lance corporals. They were buried under 15 feet of snow. The official report says all 3 were killed in the slide and only 2 bodies were recovered." Frank paused. "That is not what happened." He squeezed her hands. Henry pulled the original incident report, the one written by the surviving Marines who reached the scene first, the one that got revised 3 weeks later by a desk officer in Washington who needed to clean up the paperwork. Frank's voice was steady. "Wyatt Hartley was not caught in the avalanche, Eleanor. He saw it coming. He had 30 seconds. He could have run. He didn't. He went the other way. He went back into the slide path. He pulled 1 Marine, a kid named Bradley Sutton, out from under 6 feet of snow with his bare hands. Then he dug for the second one, a kid named Andrew McKe. He got him out too." Eleanor was not breathing. Then a second slide came down Eleanor, a bigger one, 20 seconds after the first. He had no way to know. None of them did. Frank's eyes filled. "He was buried alive, ma'am, trying to reach the 3rd Marine, a kid named Joel Reeves. Joel was already dead. Wyatt did not know that. Wyatt was still digging when the second slide came." The diner was silent. Eleanor closed her eyes. When she opened them, her eyes were wet, but her face was not. Her face was something else, something Frank had never seen on a grieving mother before. Pride. "My boy," she said softly. "Oh, my boy. He saved 2 Marines, Eleanor. With 30 seconds to live, he saved 2 Marines. Why didn't they tell me?" Frank shook his head. "Henry says the desk officer who revised the report classified it wrong. Filed it as a training fatality instead of an action of valor. There are awards Wyatt was eligible for. The Navy and Marine Corps medal at minimum. Possibly more. He never received them. Nobody ever filed the paperwork. Why? Because the desk officer made a mistake, ma'am. And the mistake never got caught. For 12 years. Frank's jaw tightened. Henry Pruitt is going to fix it. He is going to refile the case. He's going to see that Wyatt gets every honor he is owed. He told me that personally. He told me on the phone. Eleanor was quiet for a long time. She looked down at her son's dog tags. She picked them up. She held them to her lips. She kissed them. When she spoke, her voice was very, very small. Frank, I need to know. Those 2 Marines my boy saved. Yes, ma'am. Are they still alive? Frank hesitated. One of them is not Eleanor. Bradley Sutton. The first one Wyatt pulled out. He came home with Wyatt's name on his soul. He could never carry it. He took his own life in 2018. He left a wife and a daughter. Eleanor closed her eyes. Oh, Lord. The other one is alive. Andrew McKe. He lives in Iowa. He works as a mechanic. He has 3 children. According to Henry, he has been writing letters to the Marine Corps for 12 years, asking who saved him on that mountain. The Corps could never tell him, because the file was classified wrong. Frank looked at Eleanor. He doesn't know your son's name, Eleanor. 12 years, and he has been waiting to know whose name to thank. Eleanor let out a long, shaking breath. She squeezed Frank's hands. Then I think, she said, I think we need to tell him. Frank nodded. Yes, ma'am. I think we do. They sat there a long time. Outside, the streetlights came on. Snow began to fall again. Soft this time. Gentle. Eleanor finally spoke. Frank? Yes, ma'am. 3 days ago, my son was a missing Marine in a paperwork error. Today, my son is a hero in a story I have not finished hearing. And the brother my Tommy never had time to tell me about is sitting across from me at this booth. She squeezed his hand. I have spent 12 years thinking the Lord had forgotten this address. Frank smiled, the first real smile she had seen on him. Ma'am, I do not think the Lord forgets addresses. No, Frank, I do not think he does either. Outside, the bell of First Methodist began to ring evening prayers. Inside, 2 old people sat in a small diner in a coal town in West Virginia. They were not strangers anymore. They were the only living members of a family that had been broken apart in pieces scattered across 43 years. And they were finally beginning to put it back together. Frank Caldwell sat at the booth in Hartley's kitchen on a Wednesday morning in late November. A piece of lined paper in front of him, a pen in his hand. He had been staring at the page for 40 minutes. Eleanor came over with a fresh pot of coffee. She filled his cup without asking. She sat down across from him. It's hard, she said. Isn't it? Yes, ma'am. What do you have so far? Frank turned the paper around. It said, Dear Mr. McKe, that was all. Eleanor smiled gently. Frank, you have stood at the foot of more deathbeds than most men have shaken hands. You have written sermons. You have written letters to widows. You have done this kind of work your whole life. This is different, Ellie. It was the first time he had called her Ellie. She did not correct him. How is it different? Frank set the pen down. Because for 12 years, this man has been waiting to know whose name to thank. And the name is your son's. And I am the one who has to write it down. And every word I put on this page is a word that crosses a distance no letter is meant to cross. Eleanor was quiet for a moment. Then she said, Frank, just tell him the truth. So Frank picked up the pen and he wrote, Dear Mr. McKe, my name is Frank Caldwell. I am writing this letter on behalf of a woman named Eleanor Hartley, who lives in Milbrook, West Virginia. Mrs. Hartley is the mother of the Marine who saved your life on Vail Pass on November 14th, 2012. His name was Corporal Wyatt Robert Hartley. He was 31 years old. He was a mountain warfare instructor. He was the only son of a widow. He saw the avalanche coming and he had 30 seconds to decide. He did not run. He pulled Lance Corporal Sutton out of 6 feet of snow with his bare hands. Then he came back for you. He pulled you out next. Then he went back a third time for Lance Corporal Reeves. That is when the second slide came down on top of him. The Marine Corps misclassified the incident report. For 12 years, your benefactor's name has been buried under a paperwork error. We have only just learned the truth. Mrs. Hartley would like you to know that her son loved his country, loved his Corps, and loved his mother. He wrote her letters from every duty station he ever served at. He carried a Bible his chaplain gave him in 2003. He was by every measure available to a mother, a good man. I do not know whether you have spent these 12 years searching for him. I know that some men do. I know that some men carry their survival like a debt that cannot be paid. If that is your situation, sir, I am very sorry. I have buried a great many Marines. I have sat with the men who walked away from the same fight that took their brothers. I know how that weight settles. Mrs. Hartley would like to meet you if you would like to meet her. There is no obligation on your part. She asks for nothing. She would simply like, after 12 years of not knowing, to put a face to the man her son saved. If you would prefer not to come, she understands. Either way, sir, please know this. Wyatt Hartley would be proud of the life you have built. He would be glad you are alive. He would not want you to carry his name like a stone. With respect, Frank Caldwell, Major Retired United States Army Chaplain Corps. Frank set the pen down. He read it back. He folded the letter. Eleanor put her hand over his. It's a good letter, Frank. I hope so. He'll come. You don't know that, Ellie. Yes, I do. She picked up the envelope. She walked it across the street to the post office herself. Andrew McKe did not write back, not for 2 weeks. Frank tried not to count the days. He failed. In the meantime, Milbrook absorbed the news. The story moved through the town the way news moves in places like Milbrook. Slowly, quietly, person to person. Over coffee at Hartley's, over fence posts on Hickory Lane, over the offering plate at First Methodist on Sunday morning. Wyatt Hartley was not a missing Marine anymore. Wyatt Hartley was a hero. Reverend Brooks announced it from the pulpit on the first Sunday of December. He read the corrected incident report aloud. The whole congregation stood. Some of them cried. Eleanor sat in the front pew with Frank beside her, and she did not cry. She held her son's dog tags in her lap. She held her chin up. The Reverend said in the kindest voice he had, "For 12 years this church has prayed for our missing son. Today we know that he was not lost. He was given. He gave himself on a mountain for 2 men he barely knew. The Lord has finally seen fit to return his name to us. Let us return it to him." After the service, half the town came to the diner. People brought casseroles, pies, a handmade quilt with Wyatt's name embroidered on it. An old man Eleanor had not seen in 20 years drove down from Charleston with a shadow box and a folded American flag. Eleanor stood at the door and accepted each one. She was tired by the end, but she was upright. Frank stood beside her the whole time, a quiet man in a leather vest. With a Marine Corps lapel pin he had pulled out of an old uniform jacket and pinned to his collar. The pin had belonged to his brother Tommy. Tommy had served 2 years in the Marine Corps Reserve before he was honorably discharged for a knee injury. Frank had not worn that pin in 44 years. He wore it now. The first letter to come was not from Andrew McKe. It was from a woman named Carol Sutton. She lived in Fort Wayne, Indiana. She was 41 years old. She was the widow of Bradley Sutton, the first Marine Wyatt had pulled out of the snow. Her letter was 3 pages long. The handwriting was tight and careful. The kind of handwriting a person uses when they are trying not to break. Mrs. Hartley, I do not know how you got my address. I imagine the Marine Corps is involved. I want you to know before I say anything else that I do not blame your son for what happened to my husband. I want to say that first because I have spent 6 years afraid that someone someday would come looking to make sure I knew who saved Bradley. And I have been afraid because I did not know until your letter that the man's name was Wyatt. Bradley never told me his name. The Corps never told him. He went to his grave not knowing. He went to his grave thinking he had been pulled out by a stranger. He used to say that his life had been bought and he could not pay back the buyer because he did not know the buyer's address. That kind of debt, Mrs. Hartley, will hollow a man out. I watched it hollow Bradley out for 6 years. He could not sleep. He could not work. He could not look his daughter in the eye some days because he felt he did not deserve to be the father of a child when better men were dead. He took his own life on a Tuesday afternoon in October of 2018. He left a note. The note said he was going to find the man who saved him and apologize. I have hated the Marine Corps for 6 years for not telling me Wyatt's name. If they had told us, I am not saying my husband would still be alive. But I am saying he might have had something to hold on to. He might have had a name to write a letter to. He might have had something other than a stranger's debt sitting on his chest. I am writing to you now, Mrs. Hartley, because there is something I have to give you. Bradley kept a journal. He started it after Veil Pass. He wrote in it every day for 6 years. He wrote about your son. He wrote about the mountain. He wrote about the snow. He wrote about how it felt to be pulled out by hands he could not see. I have not been able to read the whole journal. I have read pieces. The pieces are about a man your son was, even though Bradley did not know his name. Your son, Mrs. Hartley, must have been someone very good. Bradley felt him. He felt him every day for 6 years. I want you to have this journal. I want you to know your son the way my husband knew him. I want you to know that even though Bradley's life ended too early, the gift your son gave him was real. We had 6 more years. We had a daughter. We had a wedding anniversary. We had Christmases. None of those things would have happened without your boy. I will drive to Milbrook on Saturday, December 14th, if that is acceptable to you. I will bring the journal. I will not stay long. I am not coming for closure. I am coming because my husband would have come if he could. With deep respect, Carol Sutton. Eleanor put the letter down. She walked into the kitchen. She did not come out for a long time. Frank found her sitting on the floor next to the freezer, her arms wrapped around her knees, her face wet. He sat down beside her on the linoleum. He did not say anything. He was a chaplain. He knew when not to say anything. After a long while, Eleanor spoke. Frank? Yes, ma'am. There is so much weight in this. So much weight no one ever told me about. I know. How do people carry this much weight, Frank? Frank thought about it. They don't, Ellie, not alone. That's why we are here. She put her head on his shoulder. That's why you are here. Yes, ma'am. That's why I'm here. Carol Sutton arrived on a Saturday afternoon. She drove a blue Subaru. She brought her 17-year-old daughter, Hannah. Hannah did not speak. Hannah had her father's eyes. Eleanor met them at the door of the diner. She did not say anything either. She simply opened her arms. Carol Sutton walked into them. 2 widows, 2 strangers, holding each other in the doorway of a diner in West Virginia with a teenage girl standing behind her mother, watching, and Frank Caldwell standing on the other side, watching, and the bell over the door swinging on its broken hinge, and the thin December sun coming through the window onto the linoleum. They sat at the booth. Carol slid the journal across the table. It was a black leather composition book, worn at the corners, the edges of the pages soft with use. Eleanor laid her hand on it. She did not open it, not yet. I want to read it slowly, she said. I want to read it the way it was written. Of course, Carol said. Carol, may I ask you something? Yes. Did your husband ever know peace? Carol's lower lip trembled. Sometimes, in small windows, when Hannah was little mostly, when she would crawl into his lap, when she would fall asleep on his chest. Carol looked at her daughter. Hannah was looking out the window, pretending not to listen. I think, Carol said quietly, that on those afternoons my husband was at peace. I think your son gave him those afternoons, Mrs. Hartley. I think those afternoons were Wyatt's gift. Eleanor closed her eyes. She nodded. She opened her eyes. She looked at Hannah. "Honey," Eleanor said. "Come here." The girl looked up. She walked hesitantly around the booth. Eleanor took her hand. "My son saved your father," Eleanor said. "And your father carried that weight. And your father is not here to tell you what I'm about to tell you. So I am going to tell you on his behalf." Hannah's eyes filled. "Your father survived a mountain," Eleanor said. "And then he gave you 17 years of being your daddy. The mountain almost took him. But your daddy fought every day to stay. He was not always able to fight as hard as he needed to, but he stayed as long as he could, and he loved you very much." Hannah was crying now, silently. "And the man who pulled him out of the snow? That was my boy. And my boy would be very glad to know that his life produced your life. Your daddy lived long enough to make you, and you, sweetheart, are my boy's gift too, as much as you are your daddy's." Hannah threw her arms around Eleanor's neck. The girl held on for a long time. Carol Sutton put her face in her hands. Frank Caldwell walked outside. He stood on the sidewalk in the December sun. He looked up at the sky. He took a long breath. For the first time in 14 years, he did not feel like running anymore. That night, after Carol and Hannah had checked into the motel, Eleanor opened the journal. She read in the booth by lamplight. Frank sat across from her drinking coffee, not speaking. She read for hours. Around 11, her hand froze on a page. She read it twice. She looked up at Frank. Her eyes were wide. "Frank?" "Yes, ma'am?" "There's something here. Something Bradley wrote about what Wyatt said to him on the mountain, before the second slide." Frank set down his coffee. "What did he say?" Eleanor read aloud. Her voice was soft but clear. "He was digging me out and he was talking the whole time. I think he was talking to keep me conscious. He said his name was Wyatt. He said he was from West Virginia. He said his mama made the best meatloaf in 3 counties. He said his stepdad was named Robert, and his stepdad was a coal miner, and his stepdad was a good man. He said something else. He said he had a chaplain once, a chaplain at Lejeune. He said the chaplain gave him a Bible and saved his faith. He said if he ever made it home, he was going to find that chaplain and thank him. He said the chaplain's name was Caldwell." Then the second slide came. Eleanor stopped reading. The diner was silent. Frank Caldwell stared at the page. His hands began to tremble. "Ellie?" "Yes, Frank." He was thinking about me. In his last." "Yes, Frank." His last words, some of his last words, were about a man who turned out to be his Uncle Frank. Frank's eyes filled. He could not speak. Eleanor reached across the table. She closed the journal gently. She kept her hand on it. "Frank Caldwell," she said. "You are not late. Do you hear me? You did not arrive late. You arrived right on time. The boy was waiting for you on a mountain in 2012. And he is waiting for you now. Through this journal. Through this letter. Through the life he gave to that little girl who is sleeping in a motel room across the street." Frank could not answer. Eleanor continued. "You came 2,400 miles to deliver a Bible to a stranger. The Lord did not send you here to deliver a Bible, Frank. The Lord sent you here to find the family you did not know you had. And the Lord sent you here to give that family back to itself." She held the journal tight. "That is the work the Lord sent you here to do. And you are doing it." Frank Caldwell, retired Army chaplain, bowed his head over a black leather composition book in a small diner in a coal town in West Virginia. For the first time in 14 years, he prayed. The words came hard, but they came. Andrew McKe finally wrote back on the first Monday of December. The letter was short. "Mr. Caldwell, your letter has been on my kitchen table for 9 days. I have read it 40 times. I have not been able to pick up a pen until now. I have been waiting 12 years to know that name. Please tell Mrs. Hartley that I will come. I will drive to West Virginia after the holidays. I would like to bring my wife and my 3 children. I would like to introduce my son, my oldest, to Mrs. Hartley. My son's name is Wyatt. I gave him that name 11 years ago. I did not know whose name I was giving him. I just knew I had been pulled out of 15 feet of snow by a man whose name I would never learn, and I wanted to honor him somehow. I wanted my boy to have a name that meant something. Please tell Mrs. Hartley that her son's name has been spoken every day for the last 11 years in a house in Iowa. We did not know whose name it was, but it has been spoken. With gratitude no letter can hold. Andrew McKe. Eleanor read the letter standing up. Then she sat down. Then she stood up again. She walked into the kitchen. She walked back out. She walked outside into the cold without a coat. She stood on the sidewalk in front of the diner. She looked up at the gray December sky. A boy in Iowa, 11 years old, named Wyatt. She came back inside. Her cheeks were red. Her eyes were bright. Her face was alive in a way Frank had not seen. "Frank Caldwell," she said. "I have a grandson I did not know about." Frank smiled. "In a manner of speaking, Ellie. In every manner that matters, Frank." "Yes, ma'am. In every manner that matters." The Marine Corps moved faster than Frank had expected. Master Gunnery Sergeant Henry Pruitt was a man who, when he gave his word, kept it. Within 6 weeks of his phone call to Frank, the corrected paperwork had moved through 3 desks at Quantico. The case had been reopened. The Navy and Marine Corps Medal had been approved posthumously for Corporal Wyatt R. Hartley. Pending was a higher review for additional honors. The ceremony was scheduled for the 2nd Saturday of January. It would be held in Milbrook, at the request of the family. The Marine Corps League agreed. The local chapter in a county over took on the planning. 200 chairs were set up in the gymnasium of Milbrook High School. A color guard was arranged. A bugler was hired. A general from Quantico flew in. Frank Caldwell did not have to plan anything. He was simply asked to speak. As the family chaplain, he was offered the choice. It was not assumed. He said yes. He spent 2 weeks writing the speech. He tore up 6 drafts. The night before the ceremony, he sat in the spare room above the diner. The room with the football trophy. The Marine Corps poster. The bed his nephew had slept in. He sat at the small desk by the window, a single lamp on, and he wrote the speech he was going to give. The speech was 3 pages long. When he was done, he folded it. He put it in his jacket pocket. He went downstairs. Eleanor was sitting in the booth, in her good Sunday dress, going through old photographs, pictures of Wyatt as a boy, pictures Frank had never seen. "Look at him," Eleanor said softly. Frank looked. A 6-year-old boy holding a fishing pole. A 9-year-old boy in a Halloween costume. A 12-year-old boy on the front porch of a house Frank had never been inside. "Tommy's eyes," Frank said. "Yes." "And his jaw." "Yes." "And your smile, Ellie." She looked up at him. "You see Tommy in him?" "I see Tommy, and I see you, and I see the boy himself." She smiled. "Frank, are you ready for tomorrow?" "I think so, ma'am." "What did you write?" Frank thought about it. "I wrote what I had." She nodded. "Then it will be enough." The gymnasium was full. 200 chairs, every one of them taken. Standing room along the back wall. Marine Corps League members in their uniforms. Cousins of cousins from 3 counties. The whole congregation of First Methodist. Every member of the Milbrook Volunteer Fire Department. Sheriff Whitfield in his dress blues, Reverend Brooks in his clerical collar. Walter Pops Mercer in the front row with his Korean War service ribbons pinned to a wool jacket. Carol Sutton was there. Hannah was there. Andrew McKe was there, with his wife, with his 3 children. The boy named Wyatt, 11 years old, in a small navy blue suit, sitting in the second row, holding his mother's hand. Henry Pruitt was there. He had flown in from California. He looked like a man carved from oak. The general from Quantico spoke first. He read the citation for the Navy and Marine Corps medal. He spoke about valor, about selfless service, about the highest traditions of the Corps. He presented the medal to Eleanor Hartley. Eleanor stood. She accepted it. She did not cry. She would cry later, in the kitchen of the diner, with the medal on the counter, with Frank beside her. But not now. Now she stood up straight, the way her mother had taught her, the way her son had stood up straight in his Marine Corps dress blues 23 years ago on the day he graduated boot camp. She held the medal against her heart. She nodded once to the general. She sat down. The general called Frank Caldwell to the podium. Frank stood. He walked up to the front of the room. He took the folded speech out of his jacket pocket. He looked out at 200 faces. And he stopped. For a long moment he stood there. He looked at Eleanor in the front row. The medal in her lap. The dog tags around her neck. She was nodding at him, slightly, steadily, the way a woman nods who has decided that her own grief will not be the heaviest thing in the room. He looked at the boy named Wyatt in the second row, the 11-year-old, with his father's eyes and his namesake's name. He looked at Carol Sutton, at Hannah Sutton, at Andrew McKe. He folded the speech back up. He put it in his pocket. He took out instead the photograph. Tommy Caldwell, age 32. A young waitress named Ellie. A Triumph motorcycle. The summer of 1980. A roadhouse near Pittsburgh. He held it up. His voice came out rougher than he had practiced. But it carried. It reached every corner of the gymnasium. My name is Frank Caldwell. I rode into this town 9 weeks ago to deliver a Bible to a Gold Star mother. I am a retired Army chaplain. I came here to keep a promise. He paused. I did not come here looking for family. I had not had any family for 44 years. My older brother Thomas died in 1980. My wife Margaret died in 2010. After Margaret, I stopped praying. After Margaret, I rode. He held the photograph higher. This man, he said. This man with the motorcycle. He was my brother Tommy. The summer this picture was taken, he was 32 years old. He was working construction in Pittsburgh. He fell in love with a waitress at a roadhouse called the Blue Heron. He wrote me letters about her. He said he was going to marry her. 3 months later, on a highway in Ohio, a trucker ran a red light. Tommy died on a Tuesday in November. He was buried in a cemetery in Pennsylvania. He never knew. He never knew that the woman he loved was carrying his son. He never knew that his son was about to be born in a coal town in West Virginia. He never knew that his son would grow up to be a Marine. He never knew that his son would die saving 2 other Marines on a mountain in Colorado. My brother died not knowing that his life had produced a life, a good life, the best life this town has ever produced. The gymnasium was utterly still. Eleanor was crying now, quietly, without trying to hide it. Frank looked at her. He smiled at her, a small, gentle smile. He turned back to the room. I came to Milbrook a stranger. I leave Milbrook a man with a sister-in-law, with a nephew whose courage has rewritten my heart, with a town full of friends, with a faith I thought I had buried with my wife in the dirt of West Texas. He looked at the boy in the second row, the 11-year-old, Wyatt McKe, and with a grandnephew, who carries my brother's grandson's name, and who is by every measure I can find the future of a name that has not died, will not die. He paused. My brother Tommy did not get to come home. Eleanor's son Wyatt did not get to come home. Bradley Sutton did not get to come home in the end. He looked out over the gymnasium. But we are home. The living are home, and the dead are with us. And the name Hartley and the name Caldwell are written together now in the only book that finally matters. He paused. His voice cracked. He let it. My brother loved this woman his whole life. He died not knowing he had a son. But that son lived a life that would have made him proud. I came here to deliver a Bible. I leave here having found the only family I have left. He stopped. He folded the photograph. He stepped down from the podium. 200 people rose to their feet. The applause was not quick. It was not loud. It was deep, long. The kind of applause that is not really applause. That is something else. That is a town saying yes. That is a town saying we receive what you have given us. That is a town saying welcome home. Eleanor walked up to Frank. She did not say a word. She put her arms around him. She held on. The bugler began to play taps. The clear, slow notes filled the gymnasium of Milbrook High School. And Frank Caldwell, for the first time in his life, knew exactly where he was. Spring came late to West Virginia that year. By the time the dogwoods bloomed, Frank Caldwell had moved his life out of Texas. He sold the ranch outside Amarillo. He kept the herb garden, Margaret's garden. He dug it up and brought it east in the saddlebags of the Harley. He replanted it behind the small parsonage on Hickory Lane next door to Eleanor's house. Frank had reopened the little white chapel on the edge of Milbrook, the one that had been boarded up since 1998 when the mine closed and most of its congregation moved away. Reverend Brooks had laid hands on Frank's shoulders one Sunday morning at First Methodist and said, "Brother Caldwell, there is a chapel waiting for a chaplain. It has been waiting 26 years. Frank had said yes. He preached his first sermon on Easter Sunday. The chapel filled up. Bikers came. From 3 counties over. Veterans came. From every branch of service. Old miners came. Coal-faced even after retirement, because some things do not wash off. Eleanor sat in the second pew. She wore a yellow dress. She held the dog tags in her lap. Frank preached about a road that does not lead away from home. He preached about Psalm 23. He preached without notes. When he was done, an old woman named Mrs. McKe, who had not been to a church service in 11 years, walked up the aisle and asked him if he would baptize her grandson. Frank said yes. He baptized the boy on the 3rd Sunday of May, in the creek behind the chapel. The water was cold. The boy laughed. Frank laughed. Eleanor stood on the bank and clapped her hands. In June, Andrew McKe came back to Milbrook. He brought his son Wyatt. The boy was 11. He was tall for his age. He had his father's calm, easy way about him. He shook Eleanor's hand the first time he met her, and he called her ma'am, and Eleanor laughed and said, "Sweetheart, you can call me Grandma Ellie if you want." The boy thought about it. He nodded. "Yes, ma'am, Grandma Ellie." Eleanor laughed again. She laughed in a way Frank had not heard her laugh before. The laughter of a woman who had decided that her life was not over, that her family had not ended, that something new and unexpected and very good had taken up residence in the empty rooms. The boy spent 2 weeks in Milbrook that summer. Frank taught him how to ride a dirt bike on the back acres of Walter Mercer's farm. Walter himself came out and supervised leaning on his cane and giving advice that was probably out of date but was offered with great seriousness. The boy listened with great seriousness back. He did not crash. Not once. On the last night, Eleanor cooked meatloaf for everyone. Andrew McKe, his wife Patricia, his daughters Lily and Beth, the boy Wyatt, Walter Mercer, Reverend Brooks, Sheriff Whitfield, who had become somewhere along the way one of Eleanor's closest friends, Carol Sutton and Hannah Sutton, who had driven down from Indiana for the weekend. The booth was not big enough. They pulled 3 tables together. There were not enough chairs. Frank brought stools from the counter. There were 16 people in Hartley's kitchen that evening. There was not a single empty seat. Eleanor stood at the head of the long table. She raised her water glass. The room went quiet. "I would like to say grace," she said, "if that is all right with everyone." It was all right with everyone. She bowed her head. "Lord," she said, "for 12 years I sat at this table with 1 empty chair. I asked you every Sunday to bring my boy home. I do not understand the road you took to answer that prayer. I do not understand why he could not come home in his own body. But I see now, Lord, that you sent him home in pieces, in a boy named Wyatt, who calls me Grandma Ellie. In a journal, a grieving widow drove 8 hours to deliver. In a brother-in-law I did not know I had, who rode 2,400 miles to deliver a Bible. In a daughter named Hannah, who hugged me in the doorway. In a town that did not let me grieve alone. She paused. My boy is home, Lord, in all the ways that matter. She raised her glass. To Wyatt Robert Hartley, the best son a mother could have asked for, and to all the ways he is still here. 16 glasses lifted. To Wyatt. Frank Caldwell sat next to Eleanor. He looked down at the table. He looked at the people gathered there. He thought about the road that had taken him through 14 years of riding, through 2,400 miles of November snow, through a blizzard, into a diner, into a chair that had been empty for 12 years. The road had not led away from home after all. It had only taken the long way around. He looked over at Eleanor. She caught his eye. She smiled at him. He smiled back. Outside, a soft summer rain began to fall on Main Street, Milbrook, West Virginia. And the bell above the door of Hartley's kitchen, which had hung crooked since the night Frank Caldwell first walked in, swung once in the warm evening breeze. Then it was still.